Thank you all. You can hear me? Perfect. Thank you all for coming today and coming to listen to me. I'm Derek Schenk, the Datex of CTO of Datex. And today I want to talk to you about DataStealth. And probably none of you have heard of DataStealth before coming here today. And interestingly, you've probably, through booking a flight or making a payment online, potentially looking at your account, have interacted with DataStealth and not even realized it. DataStealth is an innovative breakthrough technology. It's patented. It is proven to prevent data breaches. It was designed from the ground up for PCI DSS. Datex is a PCI service provider level 1 audited organization. Not sure if Corey's in here, but hi. Datex is also a member of the PCI SSC, a participating organization. I only have about 20 minutes today, and I'm going to go through some things here. I'm happy to connect with you afterwards at the back or at our booth if you want to go in more detail. And I'm going to start off by talking about a little bit about how DataStealth works. So if we take an example of an existing merchant application, it's a really simple example, user, merchant application, payment processor. We could all wish they were this easy. The merchant application is probably 20 or 30 legacy applications, internally built, not designed for PCI, and bringing those into scope for PCI and the audit becomes difficult. Sometimes you can't change those applications because they were purchased, the people that wrote the software aren't there anymore, or it just isn't possible from a resourcing perspective. So often what happens is the system stays in scope, and we put compensating controls or software around it. We do file integrity checking on disk. We have software development lifecycle processes, and these are all great, but they're working around the system. So DataStealth is completely different. As I said, it's innovative. DataStealth works by putting around the environment. DataStealth is placed in front of the application and optionally behind. I'll go through why after. And it works at the network level. It processes web traffic. We do other protocols like email, SMTP. We do file transfers, et cetera. But it's inspecting and working on the traffic as it's going back and forth. So what this means, and what I've done is I've selected a couple of common cases that we see that we help customers with today, and I kind of want to zero in on a few of those. So the first problem, and this is a really big item, as you all know, coming into PCI 4, is the integrity of the assets that are being delivered, the web page, the JavaScript, et cetera. Being able to know what is being served up from a payment page perspective and ensuring that it's the right content. So as I said, common approach today is file integrity checks, static checks that happen afterwards where something is checking the page to make sure it's correct. The challenge that exists there first is those all rely on a human to interact to fix the problem. So Friday afternoon, an email comes in, I don't pay attention to it, it said, oh, your payment page changed. Weekend goes by, Monday was a holiday, Tuesday I come in, I was busy, Thursday, Friday I get to it. I've been compromised for the whole period of time. In addition, static file checking checks files on disk. If you have a content management system that's delivering product information and it was compromised, that gets injected into the page and it's not going to get picked up. So it's too late. DataStealth, because of where it is placed in the line of traffic, does not require any changes to the customer application. There's no installation, there's no agent, there's no services. And it's doing real-time integrity checking of every single page that comes through. So we take the content of the page, we identify dynamic elements, like the name and account number. Those get removed from the page. They get fingerprinted, and it checks against allowed known fingerprints. That works for JavaScript, it works for page content, et cetera. The benefit here of this is in the event that a page changes for any reason, CMS compromised, page compromised, the page isn't delivered. The customer is sent to a "we're sorry" page or somewhere else, and there is no breach. The next area we see a lot is libraries and scripts, including third parties. I've heard some other speakers talk about this today, where you go to the payment page and you take a look at the assets that were loaded, and there's a long list, and you don't necessarily know where they all came from. And worse, you aren't meeting your obligation of ensuring that all of that content was reviewed and is approved. So the risk here is I may have used a jQuery from Google APIs, and I don't necessarily think Google's going to get compromised, but it may link to a GitHub repository library for another product that happens to get compromised, and now I'm inadvertently loading content. So what Datex will do, what DataStealth will do, is rewrite those URLs as the pages come back to approved content. It rewrites it back to site local and looks at the scripts. If any of the scripts load additional content, they're all updated to load back from an approved content repository where they're also integrity checked. So moving over to the scope reduction side, and this we're seeing a lot as we come into 4.0 out of 3.2 in the scope side, where traditionally a customer may have placed an iframe in a page. It was a great delegation of scope. The content of the page goes to the payment processor. They're PCI certified, so it sort of moved the problem. The issue is that it's easy to change that page. It's easy to alter that frame to send it to paymentprocessory.com, fire up an AWS instance, get a Let's Encrypt certificate, route the traffic through, and I could be skimming content for who knows how long. Because the payments are still being processed, nobody notices. So the file integrity checking of the page is going to deal with that. But further on the scope reduction side, DataStealth can ignore the content of the page and replace it dynamically as it's being delivered to the customer with the correct content. So you can start with a page and replace it with the content. The customer could also change the page and say, iframe goes here. DataStealth processes that, replaces it with approved, verified content, integrity checking kicks in, and you've never delivered the wrong target to a particular customer. Popular one that we see from a scope reduction is payment redirection. So this is the case where the user requests a payment. It goes to the web application. The web application reaches out to a payment processor, says, hey, give me a link that I can redirect the user to. And that goes back through the application. The user leaves the site, they do the payment, and then they do a checkout, and then they'll come back to the final page. So the risk here that exists is that the URL could be altered as it's going back through the web application. So there's still a big vulnerability, and you're still in scope. So what we would do in this case is place DataStealth on the other side as well, not just in front of the application to the customer, but place it between the web application, the merchant, and the payment processor. The URL, the redirect URL would be tokenized. It would pass back through the application as a token. There is no application change. Everything looks the same. Everything works the same. When it makes it to DataStealth on the front side, that token is turned back into the real target payment URL, and then it's checked against an allow list. So we make sure that there were no changes to it. It is still going to payment processor, and that's delivered to the user. Any changes to that, any malicious content, anything that anybody's done is never going to get served up. And the last and probably the biggest item is forms. So anybody that is still using a form today still has a significant amount of scope. They're collecting a card. Even if they're using tokenization, the tokenization generally is happening further down. So there's web servers in scope, there's application servers, there's a lot still in scope. So what DataStealth is able to do, and there are varying degrees depending on the ability of the merchant or the hoster of the application to make changes. They can range from removal of the original form to DataStealth removing the form on their behalf. The form is updated to hide the original fields, and an iframe is injected in its place. So a lot like the earlier slide with the iframe, the iframe here is being injected by DataStealth. So that means from a CDE perspective, from a scope perspective, that has moved to DataStealth, who's a PCI service provider level 1 organization, and away from the merchant, reducing their scope. The iframe itself will make a call back to DataStealth, will tokenize the card, the CVV, whatever else it is that you need to collect, PII as well if needed. That information is put back into the form's submitted, and the rest of the payment process continues on. So from a web application perspective, no change. From a business process perspective, no change. Downstream, DataStealth would be placed between the merchant and the payment processor. It works for batch files, card not present, it works for API calls. And as that call is going back to actually process the payment, the token is turned automatically back into the reel and sent off. So again, large scope reduction. And the last piece I'm going to talk about today is payment card discovery. And this will seem a little bit like a shift, because I just talked about real-time protection. DataStealth has real-time protection for web and database and all these other technologies. And what that's allowed us to do over time is understand a large number of systems, a large number of protocols and payloads, file types, and how to find data inside of those. And that's tied into our discovery process, where we can look out across an organization and start from inventorying. We can see that there's a database server. We can identify what it is. We can do technical hardening requirements against it. But then once we get into it, we can scan the entire database. We can scan the Exchange server, the S3 bucket, the Azure blob, the files on disk. We inventory them. We do classification. They contain payment card information. There were 10,000 rows in the database. There were 9,900 credit cards found. That information is used for reporting. And probably one of the most important pieces at the end of this is it's great, it's wonderful to give a customer a report that says you have a problem. You have a large number of cards in a system. But it's another to be able to help them remediate it. And because DataStealth has that ability to update content, which we use on the real-time side, has the ability to actually remediate this, go into the Exchange server and deal with those emails, go into the database and tokenize or redact or remove the records that shouldn't be there. So the end result is you're not only just helping a customer understand the scope of their CDE and where the data exists, but you're also giving them options to remediate it. So I want to stop here for a second and just make sure I reiterate these key points here. So DataStealth is different. It's different because we're not changing applications. We're not doing development. We're not asking people to embark on payment process application changes. We're wrapping around the environment. There's no application changes. There's no agents, services, anything like that. It's transparent. Most implementations are DNS changes. There's a lot of testing. There's process around it. But the majority of the implementations are a DNS change, some certificate loads, and that's it. And it's agnostic. As I mentioned, there's a large number of protocols. We cover exotic things. We've processed ABSETIC, vSAM mainframe files, databases, proprietary applications, all of it covered both from a real-time protection as well as from a scanning protection. So at this point, I usually get to the point where the person on the other side looks at me and says, wow, this is great, but it sounds too good to be true. So I've asked Paul Grover, Managing Director of Confide Limited, New Zealand's premier security assessor for PCI DSS, to come out and join me for a few minutes. And he's going to share his experiences with DataStealth and their customers.
Thank you, Derek. In 2019,
can everyone hear Paul?
Yep. In 2019, while attending the RSA conference in San Francisco, I came across Datex, DataStealth's booth in the Canadian Trade Expo section. Later that year, back in New Zealand, we had a major client fail their first SAQ AEP assessment because the client's third-party vendor hadn't updated their firewalls. The client had spent years trying to become PCI DSS compliant. 90 stressful days later, following a complete firewall, hardware and software refresh, the client was assessed as being SAQ AEP compliant. The client also knew that in the following year, they might be a level 1 merchant, and this time they might not meet the requirements of a report of compliance. We suggested several solutions and the client went to tender. DataStealth was selected and subsequently implemented remotely during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. DataStealth, when implemented within our clients' environments, completely removed the payment redirect URL from their PCI DSS scope. Their compliance obligations went from SAQ AEP to SAQ-A. This decreased our clients' ongoing compliance costs considerably, not only in the allocation of technology and resources, but in the overall cost of PCI DSS assessments. Furthermore, we knew that the acquiring banks are not comfortable with just an SAQ-A only compliance and therefore required additional controls to be implemented to reduce their risk when accepting an SAQ-A only assessment. As part of these additional controls, Confide detailed DataStealth's real-time integrity checking of web page elements as an effective security control. Confide has now recommended Datex DataStealth to several of our clients who've required a reduction in their PCI DSS scope due to the cost of continued compliance. We believe DataStealth provides our clients with an effective means of reducing PCI DSS compliance while at the same time increasing their security posture via features provided by DataStealth. And it meets PCI DSS version 4 in the future. Now back to you, Derek.
Thanks, Paul. So as I mentioned, we have a booth. I think it's located right beside the drinks in the large hall there. If you have additional questions, you'd like to know whether it would work for you deployment-wise, talk about options that we have for even scope reduction for on-premise deployments that still can reach a SAC-A, I'd be happy to speak to you all. Thank you.